to look over there and you don't see lights, you don't see anything other than just a vacant lot. It sounds sentimental, but it's just sad.
Somebody didn't try hard enough to keep it going. You know, because let's face it, it's over in China now, and they're making steel and sending it back here.
There was always the big wrecking balls and the crushers, you know, just a week behind you. There was so much that slipped through the cracks that I would have liked to save.
The war effort went on for a long time, and so they had to have the factories to get the steel into them.
I have the distinguished honor of presenting the President of the United States.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked.
The steel mill, known as Geneva, stood here for half a century. It was born out of necessity in a time of war. The plant represented the pinnacle of an industrial era now spent.
It was just terribly disheartening to see the facilities go down.
Liftoff on Apollo 11.
It was an era that saw unprecedented technological development. But it also gave rise to an information age in which forging metal is less important than trading ideas and services.
Your industry like that, that's what made the old America strong.
The overwhelming feelings of awe and power demanded to be captured. The acting CEO of Geneva at that time knew the demise of the plant. He offered me the opportunity to photograph the plant. It was go from there.
The aftermath of Geneva Steel's destruction leaves more than rubble. Memories of the plant remain important for many who toiled within her gates, and Geneva's legacy inspires others to create from what she was.
To me, when I look down, even from up here, when the plant was there, to me that was a beautiful sight because we helped build it, you know. I mean, without steel, the United States wouldn't be where it is today. It's one of the main backbones of the world is steel.
Utah was a hub for steel production in the western United States since the early days of the 20th century. First with the Columbia Iron and Steel Mill in Provo, and then with Geneva Steel in Vineyard near Orem.
Whence comes this mighty giant called steel? Steel is the result of man's ingenuity in utilizing one of nature's greatest gifts, iron ore.
Steel making dates back centuries. Take iron ore and carbon-rich coke made by cooking coal, add limestone to soak up impurities, heat the mixture to a very high temperature and blow air through it to make molten iron. Transform the iron into steel with still more heat and oxygen.
This country is made on steel. All your trucks, all your automobiles. If it wasn't for steel, you wouldn't be able to make airplanes because you got to have steel for the engines.
Geneva Steel's fortunes faded in a new global economy. Low-cost steel imports competed for cost-conscious customers in Geneva's traditional markets.
Geneva Steel took about 3 years to build in the 1940s. It took about 3 years to demolish at the beginning of the 21st century. That was a huge investment of time and labor on both ends.
Geneva Steel's furnaces and mills are gone, but there was more than metal forged in her fires. Decades of associations grew from the shared experience of making steel from iron ore, limestone, and coal. Those associations continue today on at least a monthly basis as former workers rekindle memories by sharing breakfast or lunch with former co-workers. For one Utah artist, preserving something of the Geneva steel era involved a long fascination with the notion of industrial might. But his opportunity to create art from Geneva came at the plant's very last moments of existence, when her might had faded, and while salvagers removed her industrial organs and demolition crews crumbled her bones. Just adjacent to where Geneva Steel once rolled its product into massive coils, shiny new motorcycles roll off the showroom floor. That showroom exhibits in its beams and fixtures, floors and paneling, relics from its now absent neighbor, reclaimed from near oblivion. And in clean and quiet vaults, the reminders of an important part of Utah's industrial past lie cataloged. From them, and from the memories of those who labored in it, comes an appreciation of a gritty industrial giant that is no more.
In 2000 was the first year that the plant was closed, and a couple of those guys I grew up with, and then Kenny Jolly was an iron worker, and I worked with him from 1961 until 1968 when I hired in to Geneva. Jay and I'd have lunch, and then Kenny Jolly and I'd have lunch. And then we've invited Fred and then Bill Dixon come on board, and then we'd run into somebody and say, hey, you know, we're getting together every Thursday and having breakfast all along Utah County.
Kent Brown phoned me up. I thought it was a good idea to go see a lot of them there. It was nice. I haven't seen any of them since Geneva closed, so it was really fun to meet some of them again. Nothing's changed a bit.
Everybody had a nickname.
My nickname was Brownie because my last name was Brown, and my dad's nickname was Bomber.
My nickname was Chirp. They told me I squawked a lot. Everybody had a nickname. Didn't matter who it was. You either earned one or they gave you one, you know, like Barry, you know, with his big foot.
They didn't use my nickname very often, but some people you did not know their name. You only knew their nickname. There was a man that worked out in the Rowan mill. His name is Coyote. That's the only name I ever heard of the whole time I was there. I have no idea whether he had another name.
You know, the plant is dead and gone now, so we talk about our families. You know, this guy's wife's had cancer, and this guy's had a transplant from kidneys, and you know, but we end up mostly talking about the plant and who was there, and do you remember this guy putting something in this guy's sandwich and putting a mouse in his lunch bucket and stuff like that. Just practical jokes, you know. And then some guys from the Coke plant about 5 or 6 years ago started having what they called the Coke plant reunion.
We called it the Coke plant dinner, but it's ended up being a Geneva dinner. Steve Bodden started this dinner with a bunch of other guys, and then I got invited, and now we even have a group coming from Central Maintenance that joins us. We've got 10 of them guys that come. It just snowballed into something really great.
It's a simple gesture to share a meal, but like a Thanksgiving feast, the food is only part of the celebration. For the men and women who made steel together in the bowels of the Geneva plant, lunch is a time to remember when going to work was like going home to a second family.
I spent 36 years out there, and it was the best job I ever had. About 2:03, I got thinking, you know, we need to get these guys together, and we've been doing it now for 6 years, and starting next year, because so many people are dying, we're going to start doing it the first Thursday of January, first Thursday of April, first Thursday of July, and first Thursday of October.
Bodden says I'm the secretary. One of the guys told me I was the historian. What I do here is I write down the names of everybody that's came. I highlight the ones that we've lost, and from one dinner to the next. We lost Higgins. He was 90 years old. He came to every dinner, and this will be one of the first times Higgy hasn't been here. Higgy was always here. 78. We got 78 today, if I've got an accurate record there. So that's doing good. That makes your day, you know. The guys have a good time, and that's what makes this worthwhile, is everybody's able to touch base with friends, and it is so neat.
Somebody will bring up something, somebody else will bring up something else, and reminisce. Kind of interesting, you know, time does fade memories.
Always pride himself in when we went back after USX and became Geneva Steel. They'd say, gonna rig this or that out. We'll wait for Jolly and his crew to show up to do it. And that would really make you feel good, you know, that they had that much faith in you.
Can't say enough for the way they treated me. I was treated very well. I made a very good living. The last few years, some of the things that the corporation's done has kind of hurt us financially a little, and some of the policies have changed, but I realize that the industry itself is fighting for survival.
Well, it really makes you sad to look down there and just see a pile of dirt and weeds, you know. It just, I think somebody didn't try hard enough to keep it going. You know, because let's face it, it's over in China now, and they're making steel and sending it back here.
But before the liquidators sent the furnaces and rolling mills to Asia, and even before there was Geneva itself, there was land and people and potential.
If it wouldn't have been here, they could have still been raising cows and, you know, have livery stables and eat deer meat every night for dinner, because there was plenty of deer and that up in the mountains. So
50 years has changed an awful lot. It was all farms and dairies, and they raised a variety of crops. I think that I started thinning sugar beets when I was 7 or 8 years old, crawling up the road of sugar beet. And my brother, who was just older than me, would go along and block them.
Our house was the next last house here, and the rest of it was just fields. Well, in fact, when I first moved here, I'd take my young son and shotgun. We'd just go down the street here and shoot pheasants. So, you know, that's how much it's changed.
When I was a young boy, we moved from our farm here in town in 1932. And Center Street and University Avenue was the only 2 streets in the town that was paved. The rest of them was all dirt. And the city got money from the WPA, and everybody had a cesspool. So they put the sewer system in and the water system in the town, which was a great thing. And then after they got that all in, then they paved the road, and us kids were real happy about that. At least you'd go roller skating and didn't have to gouge all the chuck holes in the road and the rocks.
we didn't have a car when I was a kid. We rode horses or bicycles. We couldn't afford to go to a dentist. And back in those days, you traded, you know. I'll come and mow your lawn or build your fence or paint your house. You fix my son's teeth or whatever, you know. A lot of bartering back in those days.
There wasn't any other money except for what you could worm on a farm. You could go to the show for 10 cents. Saturday was a big day for the show. Matinee. Hoop Gibson and all the cowboys and stuff. Sometimes I'd end up with maybe 2 or 3 cents short for that 10 cents. And I'd go to my dad and say, hey, can you give me a couple of pennies? And he'd say, what do you think I am, a Rothschild? You know, times were tough. Times were tough.
Tough economic times helped breed political instability abroad. When it flashed into war in Europe and the Pacific, the face of Utah Valley would be altered forever with the arrival of industry to meet the challenge of fascism.
We had rationing, but not like anything like Pam had over there in England.
World War II broke out in Britain in 1939. I was born in London, in the center of London. Hitler had invaded most of Europe, and Britain, you know, England being an island, we weren't joined, but he just kept coming over and bombed London and Canterbury, and well, I think everybody was just angry, and we weren't going to let them beat us, we were going to beat them. They sent the women and children out of the city, and my mother and my two sisters and my brother, we went into a little village called Abingdon. I can remember a few times when the siren sounded and we had to go. We'd go into the underground because it was deep down and it protected you. And there was a school close by and it had an air raid shelter. And they turned most of the factories over to building ammunition. So my father stayed in London. They needed to build ships, they needed to build tanks, they needed to do guns. I mean, the war effort it went on for a long time, and so they needed the steel to do it. They had to have the factories to get the steel into them.
Pearl Harbor, December the 7th, 1941.
Following the Pearl Harbor attack and our being at war with Japan, and then within a day, Germany, steel became more of a critical item. The concern was to locate a steel mill off the coastal area that exceeded the abilities of some of the planes to fly that far. The plant site was one of 4 that was being considered within the county.
The vice president of United States Steel was a man by the name of Walter Mathesius. He was of German origin, and during the Second World War, he went to Germany for family or whatever the case may have been. And he met with Adolf Hitler, who wanted him to stay in Germany, and he didn't want any part of that, so he came back, and he was instrumental in doing a lot of things to get Geneva to where it, as the site and what have you. The actual decision for Geneva to be placed where it was the final decision was made by President Roosevelt. In my view, that was the greatest thing that ever happened to Utah Valley. That was the best thing that ever happened to Utah Valley.
That's one of the main reasons why they built here. There was a lot of water underneath Utah Valley. And coal was only just 60 miles away in Carbon County. They bought an iron ore mine down by Cedar City, which is one of the richest in the world, shipped it up here, and then the people. They had the people here that they knew that they would come to work.
Prior to the construction of Geneva, it was farms, and the farm land that covered was owned by 63 different people. My father had a man worked for him at Utah Power and Light that had a little farm down there, and we helped him move, and I was a party to that, and so it was, I remember it, it was just part of my life.
They cleared a lot of the farms out and was doing the excavation, and it was a tremendous amount of dirt they was moving. And I remember one place there where number 9 blast open hearth was, that I had, as a younger boy, I took and chopped onions there, right where number 9 furnace was.
I remember very clearly that I was excited about the plant. That was big things. We were going to be bigger. The towns became bigger. There were more people. There was more things going on.
We didn't really know, my dad would get up in the morning and they'd carpool. They'd come and pick him up, honk in the morning, and he'd go off to work. But he'd come home with a paycheck, which kept us clothed, bought us a house.
At one time, the construction personnel, there was 8,000 people working on Geneva. 8,000 people. There were more people came in for the construction of that lived here at the time. There was trailers inside of Orem behind what is now the present Orem City Hall. hundreds and hundreds of Army-type trailers in there for people that transferred from the East, the Midwest, or whatever to work on Geneva. Also, where the Sierra Theater is across the street, that was also trailers in there. And I had a paper route at the time, so I delivered papers to some of them. Powerhouse, well, that was the heart of Geneva, was the power plant. That was the central core of the whole plant. North of the powerhouse was the switch house. It had all the switch gear, remote switching capability for the entire plant. They could start and stop any major piece of equipment from one location. And then up on the third floor, there was what we called the load dispatcher's office, where he had visual charts and gauges showing him the operation of every facility within Geneva, be it water pressure, gas pressure, and whatever. That particular building didn't have any windows other than windows in 2 doors. The reason being, it was a defense plant corporation built at the time of the Second World War, and the last person, if that was ever under attack, enemy attack, the last person that they wanted to leave that building would be the load dispatchers.
The urgency of the war effort made construction at the Geneva site proceed at a fever pitch. In just over 3 years, Geneva had gone from farmland to one of the largest steel mills in the country.
Geneva was a fully integrated steel mill, meaning that you took ore and you took coal and you took limestone and you built the facilities to turn coal into coke, and you put it in blast furnaces under pressure from a turbo blower, and it became, through that process, it became iron. Then it was transferred to the open hearth, where it was refined into steel, and then it became, through a rolling process, steel plate, coil, structural steel for blooms, what have you. It was all a great entity. The whole plant was a great entity.
The Geneva steel plant came to life in phases as crews finished construction on major components of the facility. Many of the locals who worked on the construction project would stay on as employees, making iron and steel. No longer would income from agriculture be the mainstay of the local economy. When it opened for business, Geneva Steel was a state-of-the-art facility. It had the capacity to produce the thousands of tons of material needed for national defense in the form of raw iron and steel plating, and the wages paid fed thousands of Utah families.
I deliver papers, and the only people that had campers and bolts and things, all the play toys, was people that worked at Geneva Steel. And the rest of the people I delivered papers to did not have them. So I thought that'd be a good place to go to work.
Ship I had was over in fixed storage. I had no inklings that I'd ever go to work in a steel mill. In fact, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I thought I was the smartest man there was in the world when I was that age, but I didn't know nothing. I'd leave home to go to school, but I ended up down the pool hall, playing snooker in Smith's pool hall in the back table. And I wasn't much of a student at them days. Well, I slept in school so much, they were more or less giving me a pass to get out of there, get rid of me. So I left home, and I went into service. There I found out how dumb I really was. My experience in World War II helped me so much in maturing. It made me grow up. I'd say by having a strong work ethic and realizing that there's more to life than just playing around, that I wasn't that smart aleck kid. I didn't know everything. Some people had a lot more brains than I did, and you better start listening to them. It gave me the ability to assume responsibility and leadership in a great way. I started to work at Geneva in the 17th day of July, 1945, when I returned out of the service. In the meanwhile, I'd got married, and we was having a child, so it made you grow up. So I went to work in the brick department, which labor in the brick department, which consisted of mostly unloading railroad cars of bricks and putting them in a warehouse. I really enjoyed the work.
I started on a Monday morning, and it was my 18th birthday. I walked into Gate 2 on June 22nd, 1953. That was a fun time, and I think from that day, I always looked forward to going to Geneva. There was good days and bad days. There were swing shifts and graveyards. But at the same time, to be part of something that larger scale, it was a whole new world. It was good pay, better pay than I was making on the farms.
It was 1968, October of 1968. I'd been traveling all over the western United States, following construction, because, you build something, then you move somewhere else. Geneva was right there. See, my dad was home every night. When I went to work construction, I was gone all week and just home on weekends. Well, I got tired after about 10 years.
I worked at Geneva 26 years. I started working there because my father worked in the blast furnace, and he would talk to me into going and putting my application in. And within 2 days, I was out at Geneva.
I'd been working construction since I got out of high school, ironworkers. I really never did plan on going to Geneva. We got snowed out, actually, is what happened. Me and this real good friend of mine, John Miranda. So he came by the house, and he says, I just heard from my brother. His brother worked down at Geneva, and he says, there's some openings down there. And you've always said you wanted to go down there. And I says, well, I think I might give it a whirl. So he said, I'll bet you won't last 2 weeks. And I says, how much do you want to bet? And he says, best bottle of scotch you can buy. I says, you're on. Well, this was in, 1969. He never has paid me off.
I was offered a job, a part-time job for 3 months. And so it was in the summer, or coming summer, and I didn't have too many classes at the time, so I said, okay, I'll do that for 3 months and get a little extra cash. And 42 years and 3 months later, I retired. So I spent biggest part of my life, actually, at Geneva.
Neil actually, I think, trained me, and we worked together in the open hearth, but we had a good relationship, and I learned from him. And Neil had other responsibilities, went to other areas.
Well, Ron later took over the blueprint room, which was quite an operation in and of itself. As a draftsman, Ron was very meticulous, and his drawings were beautiful, if I may use that term. He did marvelous work, marvelous work. What he put on a drawing, there was no question. It was right. you know, and it was so plain, so vivid, and so appropriate. He was very good at what he did. He's been a great friend, and then when we retired, we started having breakfast together, and it's discontinued. About 30 years ago, when we worked in the open hearth together, he gave me this hatchet he'd made, or this axe, and he put it in a little stem and a branch, and he wrote my name on it. And this just demonstrates very well how meticulous Ron Livingston is. Very talented man. It's one thing we did have. We had the best group of people overall of any steel mill in the country.
Most Geneva workers were men, but women played a major role in the operations of the plant from the war years up until the plant's dismantling. Their duties ranged from laborer to secretary to machinery operators.
It was harder for some girls that had not worked in a hard physical environment. I was born and raised on a ranch. I was a tomboy. I wanted to lift the hay. I wanted to do what the guys did. I hauled wood with them and sawed wood and took care of the cows, and Dad figured I could handle it out there, and it was good pay, you know, and for a girl in this valley, that was the best pay. You had benefits that you couldn't get anywhere else. I worked 13 years on the oven and 13 years in byproducts. That's shoveling hot coke, cleaning door jams, dumping coal in the top of ovens, and running big heavy. The one machine weighs about 20 tons, like the pusher machine. And the pusher would push from one side, the door machine on the other side, and push it clear through into a little train car on the other side. Larry car on the top, drop coal down in, and as soon as it cooked, they push and push. We had 72 ovens that we worked with, and we pushed about 56 ovens a day. So it was definitely physical. The ovens were 2,300 degrees, so they were hot. We wore fire retardant clothes and shields that come down over your face, so to keep the heat from burning you. It was interesting.
People stereotype steel workers as mostly the men, and we became pretty comfortable out there. There wasn't a lot of us, but there was enough. And we did our share. I think we did as good a job as the men. Maybe we did it a little differently, but we got it done.
I was a single mother with a daughter, and I had minimum wage jobs driving to Salt Lake City, and it was just so much money and so close to home, and I just had to do it.
The strangest part was the younger guys accepted us less than the older guys, but you did have to prove that you could handle the job, you know, but once the guys knew that you were gonna do the job, they were fine with us. The girls had a special bond, you know, and we all kind of helped each other to know where the problems were, and so to avoid those. Some of them liked it when you worked harder than they did. Some of them didn't like that. So to watch the guys play tricks on you, one of them was loading the wheelbarrows on the handles. And if you've ever wheeled a wheelbarrow, you'd realize that it has to be loaded in the front, or you're lifting all the weight. So these guys are loading it back there and watching the girls tip it over. And I told him, I said, this is not gonna work, guys. I said, can I borrow your shovel? And I loaded the front, and he said, what'd you do that for? And he says, you'll never dump it? And I said, yes, I will. And I went up over the tracks, dumped it down the side, come back, and he says, how did you do that? I said, oh, I forgot to tell you, I was born and raised on a ranch. Yeah, it made a difference, you know, because I knew what was going on, but the guys like to play tricks on the poor girls that had never done stuff like that. I'm not sure how many girls all totaled went through Geneva, but I do know that 92 at least went through the coke plant. And I actually found 3 of the women that worked back in the war days when the women actually ran Geneva Steel. The women in the war days did everything out there. They ran the whole plant. They ran the machines, did the pushing of all of the ovens and running the blast furnace. Every job that a man did, there was a woman that was doing it at that time and fulfilling them, because there was no men here to do that. When the guys came back from the war, then the women left. They didn't stay out in the outside of the plant. The only girls you had there after that were secretaries.
The women's rights movement of the late 20th century brought women back to the plant floor. The Geneva employees who made steel and operated the machines necessary for its creation worked in a challenging environment. That environment shaped those who found themselves in it. The promise of steady work attracted many in the construction trades to work at Geneva. Instead of sitting idle during the cold winter months, workers could earn a living all year tending the fires and machinery at Geneva Steel. Iron workers, particularly, spent their time often at great heights assembling Geneva product into buildings and bridges. For them, a job at the steel plant seemed a natural extension of their career.
You know, they don't call steel, big iron, you know, that's what iron worker calls it. They have connectors, which usually ends up just two people. You know, you're on each end of whatever you're putting together. You made sure that whoever's on the other end of that piece of structure that you was putting in, that he knew what you was gonna do and you knew what he was gonna do, so that neither one of you would end up hurting them. I always said it was the glamour part of being an iron worker. Oh, you strut around like a little rooster, you know, because everybody wanted to be a connector, but not all of them could be a connector. They just have the skills. A lot of them, they'd get up in the air and that, and they'd freeze up, you know, and I'm not going to do that. There's no way I'm going to do that. That's silly. That's stupid, you know. Us guys, yeah, we'll show them.
I came to America 2 days before I was 19. I think I watched too many Doris Day films. I saved enough money to come on a one-way ticket to America. I'm sure my mother was broken-hearted. I think about it now, but I came to stay with my aunt and uncle. He worked at Geneva. That's why I ended up here. He came to Utah to help build Geneva, so he just stayed here. I wasn't brave enough to go anywhere else, and I had already met Kenny. We kind of clicked instantly, and I was in love. You know how it is when you meet someone. And he was an iron worker, and he worked building like bridges. Kenny's uncles were all iron workers, and it just ran in the family. They liked the height, they liked just the challenge of seeing something be erected. You know, you've got these steel girders, and then suddenly it's a building or a bridge, and I think there was just pride in that. When Kenny and I got married, Kenny's parents gave us a Super 8 camera, and that was what we used a lot. We have many, many videos of our family when we were all young, and we had lots of fun with that camera.
Ready? That's Pam on the right.
Kenny worked out at Flaming Gorge Dam, and they were building the bridge. And Kenny and his dad were working at Flaming Gorge then. Well, that would have been 1962. He worked many, many jobs with his dad. They worked well together. They enjoyed working with each other. And he was working at the top when they joined it. He'd say, oh, it's 600 feet down, but I didn't realize what 600 feet was. And Kenny says, I'm gonna go climb up there, video me.
And she thought I was just gonna go over there on the bridge and just crawl up it. And she got filming me and them.
And he just marched right up there. I could not believe that he would do that. After I watched Kenny walk up that bridge, I realized that he really would be in danger.
There's these beams that we had that stuck out from the side with safety nets. So a guy wouldn't fall all the way to the bottom, which is about 500 feet. So I run out there on the end of the butt and stood up and waved at her. About that time, she's about ready to pass out, weren't you?
That scared me when I realized he did that type of thing, because I didn't know before.
Oh, I was in my 30s, wasn't I? Yeah. But back then, you know, you're not afraid of anything.
I could not do that. And I'm glad that he was a safe worker. He was careful, he really was careful.
I was lucky in all the years that I worked. I think the farthest I ever fell was like off about a 6-foot ladder. Yeah, and this is the last job that I worked on with my dad. He came home for Thanksgiving and had a heart attack and died.
And they worked that whole summer together out there at Flaming Gorge. And then he got the opportunity to go to Geneva, which really was a good thing we had. It was good for us as a family.
You know, my dad, he was an iron worker, I was an iron worker. He worked at Geneva, he was a rigger when he worked there, and then I went to Geneva and I ended up being a rigger down there too, so.
Riggers were part of the team in the Geneva Central Maintenance Department. When everything was running fine, they twisted cables for the cranes and did routine fix-it jobs. But when there was an emergency, these men were called to action, sometimes in the middle of the night.
You never knew. We were like firemen. When the plant was running fine, you know, we might even been known to play cards.
No.
Only been known.
If there wasn't an emergency,
yeah,
I'd go look for it. Pretty soon I'd find one.
We were on standby. That's when we'd go work. Usually, when a fire occurred, it would be like a major breakdown in the process of the rolling, like in the rolling mills, either in the 132 or the 32-inch mill, where the product was actually being made and the money was being made. I mean, when it went out the end, the company was making money. When it didn't go out the other end, then the company wasn't making money. So if something broke down, no matter what it was, they called the Geneva Fire Department, which was us, Central Maintenance.
You always had something different to do, especially us in Central Maintenance. You know, you're all over the place. One day you might be out in the rolling mill, and next day you're in the blast furnace, the next day you're in the nitrogen plant, you know, and you always had something to do. And old Freddie Lee's always made sure you had something to do.
Foremen like Fred Lees were the frontline worker leadership at Geneva. His decades at Geneva began as a laborer and ended as a general foreman in the Central Maintenance Department.
The thing I like about him most was he would listen to you if you thought he wasn't safe. Safety was our main deal, to do the job safe. He would listen to you, and most of the time he'd compromise. If he got mad at you, it would only last just for like 5 or 10 minutes. And then he'd think about it and he'd say, you know, maybe you're right, Brownie.
Sometimes he would really get upset. I'll give you an example. He was death on safety. And we were doing a job over in this building, it's called the cinder yard, and working on the crane. Well, the first thing he did, he looked up and the crane wasn't locked out. We'd broke the cardinal rule of leaving the power on the crane, see? Oh, you could have got electrocuted. Well, he came up them stairs. He was jumping them half a dozen at a time, I swear. And he came up, and by that time we'd got off the crane. Fred, and I'm not talking to you. He says, you're dead. I said, Fred, listen. No. He says, you know what I'm gonna have to do? He says, I'm gonna have to go to my office, get on the phone, call Pam up and tell her, I'm sorry, Pam, Kenny's dead. You know, he was just that way. And I tried to explain to him what we were doing. I'm not gonna listen to you, you're just dead. So after he calmed down after a couple hours, you know, and it's all over with, but oh, when he get mad, that's why they call him Crazy Horse, you know, because he'd go crazy.
If you go upstairs on the balcony, he says, you'll see my Jeep up there.
I always tried to treat every one of my men equal. I'd let them decide more or less how they wanted to do the job. Unless I could see that it was going to be the wrong way to do the job. And I'd step in and make my better, as far as my concern, my judgment. Well, I let them argue for a while, and which was helpful because there's more than one way to do things. And so I'd listen to their jabber back and forth, and I'd pick up on, well, now that part of his suggestion has got real merit in this part, and this guy's over here. We marry the two, we'll get the job done a hell of a lot faster. My typical work day was I'd leave here 5:15 in the morning, and I'd go tour the whole plant. And I'd get back in the shop about 7 o'clock. Well, by then I'd been all through the departments and found out if any emergency, anything that they had was going to be like an emergency they had to repair. If something didn't happen by 10 o'clock, something that I hadn't expected didn't happen by 10 o'clock, I'd get in my truck and I'd go find it. Because I knew that there's going to be something happen. But I could walk in to the rolling mill or wherever, and I could tell by sound whether there's something wasn't right. And I just knew that there wasn't something right, and the next few minutes there was going to be something happening. And it was just like being an old fire horse in a fire station, you know. The bells went off, why, you got all fired up and ready to go.
Something break down in the middle of the night, a railroad train would wreck and go off the tracks to block the process, you know, the hot metal being moved. They'd call you out in the middle of the night, in the middle of the winter, 30 below zero, and we'd have to bring in big cranes to lift the engines back on, or ladles which were full of hot metal. That was another dangerous job. So we had to wait for a period of time for the top of the ladle, the hot metal, to solidify, then they'd let us go to work, trying to re-rail it, so they could move it on down the line to keep the process moving.
There'd be a breakdown out in the mill or a derail or something like that, you know, in the middle of the night. Well, the first thing they'd do is call Freddie Lee's.
No matter when I went to bed, I was going to get a phone call sometime that night. And my wife used to get so mad. If I couldn't get somebody to take care of it on the phone, then I'd have to get up and go out there.
In the middle of the night, the phone would ring, Pam would answer it. Fred talks pretty loud on the phone. He says, "Where's Kenny?" "I haven't seen him, Fred." "I know he's laying right in bed next to you." "No, he's not, Fred, he's not here. You tell him if he doesn't get down here," you know, and back then they had guards at Geneva. "I'll send the guards up and they will escort him down here to Geneva." And because he knew I'd be right there, and I could hear everything that was going on. And most of the time I'd break down and go out when
You had to have a sense of how important it was. That if you didn't do your job, the production wasn't going to go. When the production didn't go, there's going to be a whole bunch of guys going to get laid off. And a whole bunch of that equipment was an expensive equipment, tremendously expensive. And so I think it was a rush because you knew there's so much responsibility upon you to get the job done. The only way I could really get a day off or something is Friday night when I got off work. If it wasn't my turn to be the weekend warrior, I'd get in a car and take off. Well, they couldn't get me. But then when I'd get home Sunday night, there'd be a whole bunch of backup phone calls.
It was difficult to balance time with your work and family. Out of necessity, I didn't pay the attention to my children that I should have. However, they're wonderful, wonderful children. They had a good mother. But when I retired, I was gone so much. I told Barbara, my wife, I said, whatever you want done, I'm here to do it. You just make me lists and I'll do it. So she did, make me a list and I'd get it done. And that went on for a few days, and I said, okay, Barbara, one day I finished the list you wanted, the things you wanted me to do. What would you like me to do now? And she said, go. She wasn't used to having me underfoot. So I went. I came back. I had that happen to another superintendent out there. He was telling me a like story. He said, one morning, he said, my wife came out and she said, a brown paper sack on the table. And he said, well, what's that? She said, that's your lunch. And she said, I don't know where you're gonna eat it, but you're not gonna eat it here. So go. So he ended up coming back to Geneva, and it was a guard. Went on one of the gates. Great guy. Thought the world of him. Geneva Steel, it was a business, of course, but it was just a very, very large family of different jobs, different desires, different plans, and it all culminated in an end product. But it was a wonderful place to work. Not to say that there weren't some real heartaches and tragedies and what have you.
It could have been described as combat, especially in certain departments. We used to call going to the work over in the open hearth floor like combat. You had to watch each other's back because there was so much going on.
In the open hearth, they had the big furnaces, the open hearths had 7 doors. In the center of those doors, they had a round hole about 6-7 inches in diameter that they called a wicket hole. And these doors would go up and down when they charged the furnace and what have you. And it was just almost white hot looking in on the bath, which we called the molten steel. And you couldn't see anything, it was just so hot and glaring. But if you took these glasses and you looked through that wicket hole, it would just be like seeing small ripples on water. You could make out every detail inside the open hearth furnace. The same thing was true when they were pouring hot metal or when they were tapping a furnace into a ladle. There were several problems or several cautions that had to be taken working with molten steel and iron. The temperatures were different, but white hot steel or orange hot steel is very hot.
I mean, they killed a guy over in the open hearth about once a year. That was one of the most dangerous places because the railroad was pulling stuff in. They were pulling it out. Overhead cranes with tons of liquid steel, 2,000 some odd degrees.
You got a ladle full of iron there, 320 ton of molten iron. Everything's big and heavy, big and heavy. So much moving machinery. The noise was something terrific.
It was like war. It was like hell over there. So we kind of watched each other's back and trusted each other to, because you couldn't look everywhere all at once because there was so much going on. And so it really kind of made us like a band of brothers. You became friends, you got to meet their families, you went on trips with them. It became like a family. That's why we're still like that to today.
There was a lot of concern. One guy got hurt or something like that. Well, he was doing something in his house. Well, they'd all get together and go take care of that. You develop some real great friendships.
But with the passage of time came the end of Geneva. Its longtime owner, U.S. Steel, abandoned it in 1987. Local investors kept the plant open for another 15 years. But debt incurred equipping the plant with the latest technology added to the financial strains of falling prices for steel brought on by cheap imports. As the 21st century dawned, Geneva's sun set. Over a few weeks, the workers left, and the gates remained locked. Paying creditors required Geneva's parts and land be sold to the highest bidder. One former Geneva worker returned to see the plant site revert to fallow land, ripe for new possibilities.
My name's Dan Sigmiller. I worked at Geneva for almost 25 years. I was a manager in the coke plant, hired in as a pipe fitter in 1977. I spent my whole time in the coke plant here at Geneva. When the plant shut down, I was the manager over the coke and coal chemicals coal handling area. We were spending in the neighborhood of $4 million a month for coal. I would come in from the north gate, which was gate 4, and we're going across the north end of the coke plant now. To the left of us would have been the coke storage piles. Okay, that hole in the ground right there was where my office was. As a general rule, I enjoyed it. Had some good guys to work with. There was enough challenge to it. That would be furnace coke. It was made from coal. Again, probably 96+% straight carbon. The part I was the supervisor over at the end before they shut down was very critical to this product right here, so that it came out of the ovens right and could be used in the blast furnace. I was gone for about a 3-year period after the plant shut down, and the owners that bought the property called me and asked me to come back, bring some of my coke plant expertise, if you will, and that's where the demolition crew was when I got back. They were in my particular area that I was the manager over, so it was hard. All I could think about was the long, cold nights I spent out here trying to keep it running, and they were in here tearing it to bits. Thursday is sample day, water sample. So I'm out on the west side first thing in the morning taking all the water samples. I have to sample our discharge water. It has to be sampled once a week, so we have to meet certain criteria on our water samples. Remediation is just nothing more than cleaning up any spots on the property that have been determined to be solid waste management units by the state EPA. We have an outside consulting firm that comes in and does the testing, drills the holes, sends the samples off, and then the state will determine if that's anything that has to be cleaned up, dug up, removed, whatever procedure has to be followed. A lot of folks there's a real stigma that as soon as you walk on the place, it's contaminated, it's hazardous, it's terrible, and it's not. Most of it is just soil and rock and dirt and slag and, things that wouldn't hurt anything. There are some spots that had hazardous materials. Nobody would say anything different. Those areas have all been designated and determined along with the state, and U.S. Steel is involved in some of the cleanup. And so it's a combined effort that we're taking care of these spots. So we've isolated those. We've taken care of many. The south 300 plus acres is ready to sell. The tracks are run and they put a proposed station right here. We've developed the north end of the plant where the pipe mill was. It's not as though anywhere you walk you got trouble. There's a lot of ground that's just ground like anywhere else. And so there's several things going on as we speak, and we hope more to come.
The physical remains of Geneva Steel are largely gone now, but the plant's institutional memory lives on. It's housed within rows and rows of shelving and filing boxes at the Brigham Young University Library.
Special collections constitutes the living memory of our community, and we feel it's our mission and our stewardship to preserve and document that history, not only for current generations, but for future generations. The Special Collections Library at BYU contacted Geneva Steel many years ago regarding the donation of their historical collections to the university to acquire those important historical materials. From the very beginning, photographers, including federal photographers and professional photographers, worked at Geneva Steel to document the construction of the plant and the history of the plant. The collection includes, I would estimate, approximately 50,000 photographs, but it also includes other materials and records that document the history of Geneva Steel, including business records and materials, blueprints, and items of that nature. We were working on a very tight schedule to remove the items from Geneva Steel. Many of the buildings where some of these historical collections were housed were slated for immediate destruction. They were tearing buildings down, buildings were being demolished, and so we had to remove them very carefully. I'd say we worked out there for approximately 2 weeks, identifying materials that we could save. Moving Services was able to go in fairly quickly and remove the items within about 2 days.
Yeah, he told me at the start that this was a very large project, that we were going to start with the photographs and we were going to continue on to the documents. It's an immense amount of material, so we spent a lot of time on it, tens of thousands of pictures. We'd catalog it and put it all together, and now they're put in these fine boxes here, and they're all in the system, so hopefully we'll have them all available for everybody to see.
You can't really look at these same photographs day after day after day and not get curious about it, simply because processing can be a bit of a tedious job, so you tend to look at the photographs and notice and wonder what the story behind it is. And some of the photographs seem to have a story behind them simply because of the way they were taken. They had some pretty fantastic photographers who got some really intriguing shots. My favorite shot that I came across was during a strike. And it was a shot-by-shot play of a man being chased down by a couple of cops. In the process of steel making, there's some incredible shots of men standing feet from a huge vat of molten metal, and that can't help but pique your interest, so.
My grandfather actually started at the plant before it was called Geneva Steel, back in about '78. I knew he was working on the blast furnace, so when I started working on those photographs, I kept a special eye out to see if, maybe I could see him. I didn't, but some of the blast furnace photographs were some of the prettiest to look at because usually there were sparks flying in the pictures or heavy machinery at work in the pictures, so those were pretty interesting to work on. I did actually find a picture of my dad once, just as an 18-year-old kid. He was doing a presentation there. I took it home and he's pretty surprised to see it there. So, but just that one picture. Would have thought I would have found my grandfather instead of him, since my grandpa worked there much longer, but Dad was only there for a few years. It was pretty fun, pretty exciting to find it.
As part of our work and as part of their work, they also created an archival register or finding aid, which is an inventory and description of the historical collections. And that inventory or register will be available online for anybody to access and to see what we have. It's a big project, and it took countless hours, I'd say several thousand hours on the part of our students to arrange and describe the Geneva Steel historical photographs. There's tremendous value in remembering Geneva Steel and remembering the contributions of the individuals who work there. The images that I find the most interesting are the images of the workers, men and women who dedicated their lives to working at Geneva Steel. The photographs show them in their day-to-day work activities, making a living, and they're very impressive and very moving. And those images have been used extensively. By preserving and by maintaining these type of historical collections, we honor and celebrate their lives and their careers, but we also document the important role of Geneva Steel in our community in terms of its historical impact on our area and region. These materials will be of great benefit to students and scholars. It will be used by family historians and genealogists, community planners, and many other people for generations and years to come.
Before there was no more Geneva Steel, a businessman and a Utah artist found in the erasure of the plant inspiration for new ventures.
This building is about 75% reclaimed material. All the lumber is from Geneva. A lot of the hot rivet lattice work is from Geneva. The brick walls behind me are from the firehouse. There's just all kinds of stuff. The light fixtures, the doors, the iron hooks that hang the light fixtures. It was just a great place to go if you're kind of a scroungy pack rat, just to look for neat, unique items. About half the customers that come in our store are here just to see the building. They're not interested in the motorcycles. It's a lot of fun to see the older people that come in that worked at Geneva Steel, or the widows that come in and just want to remember something about where their husband worked their whole life. And so the building has drawn not a typical Harley-Davidson crowd. My family had a pretty deep history with Geneva. My grandmother worked there during the war. She was a Rosie the Riveter and operated a crane there for 3 years. And then after the men come back from the war, she gave up her job at Geneva and went back to the diner and made coffee. And my grandfather had helped build the steel plant at Geneva. And so I wanted to go visit the buildings that they were involved in and see it before it was torn down. And that's when I was really romanced by the quality of material that they used to build the steel plant. When they built Geneva Steel, they spent over $200 million building that steel plant in 1940. That's a lot of money. So things that nowadays you see that are an inch thick, in all the buildings of Geneva were 3.5 inches thick, and so they spared no expense. Geneva was the economic engine for Utah County and Utah for so many years that I felt like it had to be preserved in some way. It was an eyesore and it was smelly and all that stuff, but it had a lot of good too, and it brought a lot of people to Utah and provided a lot of people jobs and their livelihood. And so when I built this building, I wanted it to be like you were walking into a leftover building from Geneva Steel, so that people could come and see a really important part of Utah's early industrial history.
Businessman Dave Tuamisto found a way to preserve physical pieces of the buildings that were Geneva Steel. And Utah photographer Chris Dunker found in the plant's dismantling images worthy of display in museums, both local and national.
Each individual is going to have a very different relationship with Geneva Steel. For some, it was a source of pride and income, and it put food on their table. For others, it may have been a dirty, polluting industrial eyesore. For others, it may have been a part of the industrial landscape that they barely gave a second nod to. Everybody's going to have a different relationship with Geneva Steel. Finding beauty where there is none, or where a person would not typically look for beauty. In an empty desert, I see a magnificent, dramatic landscape. Any parameters that a person would use to describe beauty, I could assign to the industrial architecture. It's one thing to recognize a beautiful thing. It's another thing to translate your feelings of that object to ink on paper. So they're two different things, but that's where the craft and art comes into play. Growing up, photography was always a component to our household. My dad was a photographer, and so we always had a darkroom in the house. As a kid, I always had a camera. I never made a conscious decision to be a photographer, so to speak, as it just grew out of a natural presence, just being there. When I first traveled to Utah, it was hard to ignore the plant, Geneva Steel, as it was right next to the I-15 corridor. It was just amazing to me. I've never seen blast furnaces or an industrial compound as huge as that, and so it immediately caught my attention. Phone calls, years of letter writing, pleas for admission were not accepted. It came to a point where every once in a while I'd write a letter or make a phone call, and the acting CEO of Geneva at that time knew the demise of the plant. It was going to be shut down, it was going to be removed. He offered me the opportunity to photograph the plant, and it was go from there. Geneva Steel was a fully integrated steel mill, which means they took raw dirt into the plant and finished rolled steel left. That's, I think, one reason why I was so drawn to photograph it, is that the overwhelming feelings of awe and power demanded to be captured.
One day, Chris Dunker called me up and told me he had been doing some work at Geneva Steel and he wanted to show me his documentary photographs. So I said, sure, come and show them to me. And I really expected to see 8x10 black and white photographs. And instead, Chris brought a very large portfolio with about 30 or 40 of his large format color prints. And I was, completely floored by what I saw. It really was very unexpected, and at that moment, I thought, this is important work and I need to pay attention to it. It was almost like an instantaneous moment. I just knew that these were important photographs.
I began when it was in an idle mode, which means that the plant could have been fired back up and brought back to production, although it was being progressively shut down.
There is a level of sadness and mourning to it because Chris Dunker photographs the steel mill after it has been closed and in the process of demolition. There are spaces that are intact, so they give a sense of information about the people that maybe occupied those spaces, that may perhaps work there. They give a sense of the scale, just how large the interior of the buildings are, how large the machines are.
I loved this place. I loved being there. I loved the discoveries and the magnitude of it and the sheer beauty of the place. The vents on tops of some of the structures, for me, allude directly to the architecture of like the Taj Mahal, say. The structural mill is one plant that has this amazing roof line, and it's just, it's beautiful. The proportions between the vents on the roof and then the roof line and the structure, just the simple aesthetic qualities of it, for me, are beautiful. Some of the buildings are magnificent just in their sheer size and scale. They just seem to go on and on. It was an odd and wonderful place.
Ways to pursue art are not limited to a photographic canvas. For Dave Tuomisto, the idea to use reclaimed pieces of the Geneva plant to build his showroom required he move quickly, before it was too late.
There was always the big wrecking balls and the crushers, just a week behind you. And so the feeling of the demolition of Geneva was always kind of pressured by what was behind you. And there was so much that slipped through the cracks that I would have liked to saved. And they really kind of overlooked the things that I was really looking for, like solid oak doors and explosion-proof lights and all the neat wood ceiling structures. And so I spent about a year and harvested as much as I could and tried to stay in front of the cranes the best I could while they were demolishing all the buildings. I looked at a lot of pictures, and I spent a lot of time at the steel plant and went through almost all of the buildings and tried to pick up things. And the further into our building construction, the less we used our blueprints or our plans, and it became more of a work of art. And so when the electrician would come and see me, or when the framer would come and see me and ask me a question, my question always back was, well, what would they have done at Geneva, or what would you have seen at a steel plant? And it would help them kind of think, I'm not building a home, I'm not building a strip mall, I'm recreating a building that was built in 1940 that was built in haste and with purpose to prepare for the war effort. This is the power plant where my grandfather worked, and actually my grandma ran a crane just in the building next to that. And then here's a neat photograph of the steel plant before I-15. You can see Geneva Road. His dad worked at the steel plant, his mom worked at the steel plant, and how many days did you last at the steel plant?
3 months.
3 months.
My dad really wanted me to be a steel worker, then I would have wanted Dave to be a steel worker. You know, it's kind of a generational thing, and I ended it with my generation.
Thanks, I appreciate that. My kids will have no idea, you know, where Geneva will be Walmarts and homes in the near future. And so people can come here to see what Geneva steel was like, what it felt like, and touch and feel the materials and see how heavy and massive the steel plant was, and the way the look and feel of in Geneva has kind of been transferred into this new building.
The sense of Geneva authenticity Dave Tuomisto desired for his motorcycle dealership gets expressed in the images photographer Chris Dunker captured. Where a casual observer might suppose the use of a color filter or a printing effect in some of his Geneva images, he insists the plant itself provided all the special effects a photographer might want.
Interior spaces are very colorful, and there's a lot of saturated, unnatural, surreal colors that are created by artificial light sources, especially industrial artificial light sources.
Chris has the option of using filters to correct to a more natural daylight range that we're used to viewing, but he instead chooses to allow the natural radiation, the natural spectrum, to influence the photographs, and that's an incredibly expressive tool.
So that's a great pleasure to play with that and to use those colors to communicate a sense of eerie industrial beauty, if you will.
It's very suggestive of different moods, some of them very mournful, coloring his own perception of the sadness and the decline of American industry. Other moods tend to be a little bit more fantastic, even suggesting, you know, science fiction and maybe more apocalyptic feeling.
Around every corner was a surprise. I never knew what to expect. There were buildings that I saw, but due to time constraints, I never even entered them. The facility was that massive and that complex.
I think a huge segment of our community saw Geneva steel from the outside and from quite a distance, usually traveling on the freeway north or south. And unless they had a family member or a really close friend, a direct connection to what was happening in Geneva steel, there was quite a high level of detachment, just a sense of not knowing what steelmaking was, what it involved, the drama of it. And these photographs really provide an excellent bridge into that world.
Although this is in no way a complete document, it's a fair stab at what being present to this place might be like.
This material that is so ubiquitous, that is used in so many ways in our modern life, it's created in this place, there is a sense of alchemy and magic in the creation of steel, and I think you feel that, you grasp at that looking at some of these photographs.
At a typical Geneva workers' reunion, you don't hear much about ideas on the plant's demise due to globalization. Neither is there talk about its demolition as a source of artistic expression. Former Geneva employees see the irony that the motorcycle dealership Dave Tuomisto built from Geneva's parts itself went bankrupt because of a bad economy. Another owner now runs the business. For many, the memories of work and associations are good and enduring.
If 5,600 people worked there at one time, over the period of years, there's been many, many thousands. I don't know how to even estimate.
Ron started keeping obituaries of the people that worked at Geneva, people we worked with, people that were in the plant that we didn't know where they worked, but we knew they worked there. We have over 1,000 here, and there's probably another several hundred that is since he put these together and gave them to me.
I go to the library. I find from the old papers. If I know a death date, if I know some that I've missed, and be able to fill them back in, that by no means means I have all of them.
Between the few of us that are left, we're trying to remember these individuals and where they worked and get them in their proper area. It was quite an undertaking, but he did a good job, and he's very thorough. If he can get the information, he does a good job of it.
I'm glad for all of them that were part of my life. And I like to reflect on those people. That's why obituaries.
You thumb through those books that Ron has put together, and it's good to see the faces of those people that meant something to you many, many years ago.
It's interesting to me that Geneva couldn't make any steel. The plant had all the facilities and that, but they had people that made steel. I look forward to every day. It was new experiences, it was interesting people, it was good work, and I was learning along with it, and sad to say I had to be part of the tearing down. To take it apart, they had to have drawings too, so that was my job there, and I didn't enjoy that part of it that much either.
As they were dismantling it, I was taking pictures to kind of get a chronological display of what was happening to the plant. And it was just terribly disheartening to see the facilities go down. Such a marvelous plant. Yeah, see everything go down. Very, very, very hard to take.
I've talked to very few people that work there that don't have a vacancy inside of them now that Geneva is gone.
The plant being gone, naturally we miss it, but it isn't anything like the brotherhood and the camaraderie we had with the guys you work with. That's the part we miss the most. A lot of times the dirt and the grease we had to get into to put out the fire was a pain, but still, the bottom line was the camaraderie of the guys.
All the guys hunted and fished together, partied together, their families and wives and stuff.
Especially when you work with them every day for 30 years, you know. You become a brother, you know. You'd do anything for them.
During its half-century, Geneva Steel's furnaces produced millions of tons of finished steel and other products that found their way into a nation's economy during times of war and peace. It transformed a largely agricultural valley into an industrial magnet which attracted thousands of workers. They would go on to define themselves by the relationships they forged there.
glad I had a part in it. My dad helped build it. I worked there, I provided work for him and me, my 2 sons. It sounds sentimental, but it's something I wish was still there, and I think that people have been conditioned that they can't rely on a job for their total working years. But I found a home.
The chapter about Geneva Steel in the life of the community is closed, but the story of the plant's impact is that it changed that community forever.